The rain fell in sheets against the tall windows of Buckingham Palace, blurring the gray London afternoon into a watercolor of melancholy. Inside the king's private study, the fire crackled with a desperate energy, fighting back the chill that seemed to have seeped into the very marrow of the ancient building. King Charles III stood with his back to the door, his posture rigid, his hands clasped behind him as he stared out at the weeping sky. He was not seeing the dreary view, however. He was seeing a ghost. For years, he had been told that history would be the judge of his heart. He had been told that the greatest love story of the 20th century would eventually be understood. But as he turned to look at the sealed letter on his mahogany desk, a letter bearing the unmistakable script of his wife, as Camilla, he knew that history was a fickle and often cruel mistress. The letter was short, but its weight was that of a crown. It spoke of exhaustion, of a lifetime of public scorn, and of a desire to simply fade away into the Wiltshire countryside, to tend to her garden and her horses, and to leave the gilded cage of royalty behind for good. It was a declaration of surrender. The source of this latest rupture was as old as his reign itself, the shadow of Princess Diana. But it was not the ghost of his first wife that haunted them now. It was the lingering public perception, a narrative that had been reignited by a controversial documentary aired the previous week. The program had rehashed the darkest days of the late 1980s and 90s, as complete with grainy footage and leaked audio recordings that painted Camilla as the sole architect of a fractured fairy tale. The tabloids had predictably erupted. Headlines screamed of the Queen of Hearts versus the other woman, and the vitriol on social media had reached a fever pitch that Charles found both appalling and terrifying. For Camilla, it was the final straw. After decades of rising above it, as she had once told a journalist, the resilience that had defined her had finally cracked. A knock on the door pulled him from his reverie. His private secretary, Sir Clive Alderton, entered with a face ashen with more than just the usual London pallor. "Your Majesty," he began, his voice unusually hesitant. "There is something you need to see. The Palace Press Office has intercepted an editorial from the Evening Standard for tomorrow's front page." He placed a proof sheet on the desk. The headline was stark: "The Queen's Sorrow. A nation asks, is this love worth the crown?" Charles read the article in silence. It wasn't a hit piece, which somehow made it worse. It was a thoughtful, painfully respectful piece questioning the emotional cost of his marriage to the institution. It quoted unnamed palace aides from the 1990s describing the constitutional crisis sparked by his affair. It ended with a poll result. 52% of the public still believed Camilla bore significant responsibility for the breakdown of his marriage to Diana. For the king, the man who had waited his entire life to serve his people, this was not just an attack on his wife. It was an attack on the unity of the crown itself. "The usual statement of denial?" Clive asked, though his tone suggested he already knew the answer. Charles looked up, his eyes holding a fire that had dimmed in recent years. "No. The usual statement is what got us here. We have tried silence. We have tried dignity. It has not worked." He walked to his desk and picked up Camilla's letter. "My wife wishes to abdicate her role. She wishes to leave. To save me," she says. "To save the monarchy from the Diana question once and for all." The silence in the room was absolute, broken only by the sputtering of the fire. Sir Clive looked genuinely stricken. The idea of a consort quitting was unheard of. The constitutional implications, the public relations nightmare, the sheer human tragedy of it. It was unthinkable. Charles moved to the window again. 50 years, Clive. For 50 years I have loved her. I have loved her through marriages to other people, through divorces, through death, through the hatred of a world that never understood us. And I will not let her go because of a Pole. I will not let the memory of one tragedy create another." He turned, and in that moment he was not just the king. He was a man making a decision that would define his legacy forever. "Call the press office. Clear my schedule for the rest of the week, and find out who the editor of the Standard is. I want a meeting. Not a phone call, a meeting." Clive nodded, but Charles wasn't finished. "And prepare the blue drawing room. I am going to address the realm, but not from a teleprompter, not from a throne. I am going to speak to them as a husband, and I am going to lay it bare. All of it. The good, the bad, and the truth of my greatest error." Sir Clive's pen hovered over his notepad. "An error, sir?" Charles picked up a framed photograph from his desk. It was a picture of himself as a young man, standing awkwardly next to a young woman with a shy smile and a tragic future, Diana. Then he looked at another photo, hidden slightly behind it, of a laughing woman with twinkling eyes and a confident air. Camilla at a polo match in the 1970s. "The greatest error of my life," Charles whispered, "was not loving Camilla. It was letting the world believe that made me a villain. It is time they understood the difference." Across the palace, in her private sitting room, Camilla Parker Bowles, for she felt like that woman again, sat with a cup of tea that had long gone cold. And she had written the letter. She had offered her resignation from happiness. She felt a strange sense of peace. She had fought the good fight, but she was tired. She did not hear her husband's declaration to his secretary. She did not know that within 48 hours, the King of England would stand before the world and make a declaration that would shock everyone, not by revealing a secret, but by revealing his soul. The stage was set not for a press conference, but for a confession. The world had become accustomed to royal statements. They were usually stilted affairs, penned by committees, full of "one is gratified" and carefully parsed language designed to say everything while revealing nothing. But the notice that appeared on the Buckingham Palace letterhead on the morning of the declaration was different. It was brief, to the point, and utterly unprecedented. "The King will address the nation this evening at 8 p.m. BST. The address will be broadcast live from the Blue Drawing Room of Buckingham Palace. His Majesty will speak on a matter of personal and constitutional significance. No further details will be provided." The media frenzy was instantaneous. News channels, which had been gearing up for a slow news day, scrambled to fill the air with speculation. Was it a health update? Had the cancer returned? Was it about Prince Andrew, whose shadow continued to loom over the family? Was it a response to the growing Republican movement in Australia and Canada? The pundits ran out of theories long before the hour arrived. In Clarence House, Prince William watched the preparations on a private feed with a growing sense of dread. He had not been consulted. He had received a call from his father only an hour before the announcement went public. The conversation had been brief and, to William's mind, deeply unsettling. "Father, whatever this is, we should talk about it. The institution—" "I am not speaking as the institution tonight, William. I am speaking as your father, and as a man who is about to lose the woman he loves." "Camilla? Is she ill? Is it the cancer?" William's voice had softened slightly. Despite the complicated history, despite the loyalty to his mother's memory, he did not wish ill on his stepmother. "No, she is not ill. She is broken. There is a difference. And I will not stand by and watch it happen. Watch it at 8 o'clock. You might learn something about what it means to fight for something." The line went dead, leaving William staring at the phone. Beside him, Kate placed a gentle hand on his arm. "Whatever it is," she said softly, "he's your father, and he's hurting." In her Wiltshire retreat, where she had retreated for what she thought would be the last time, Camilla watched the same news ticker. Confusion warred with anxiety. What was he doing? She had told him she was finished. She had told him to let her go quietly, to let the storm pass. This felt like the opposite of quiet. She picked up the phone to call him, but his line was busy. Again and again. He was cutting her off, shutting her out of the very conversation that was about her. At 5 minutes to 8, the world went quiet. Pubs in London fell silent. Offices paused. In homes across the United Kingdom and the Commonwealth, families gathered around their televisions. In the blue drawing room, the lights were warm and soft. A deliberate contrast to the cold, formal addresses of the past. There was no grand desk, no throne-like chair. Instead, King Charles III sat in a simple armchair, a small table beside him holding a single photograph frame, its face turned away from the cameras. He wore a simple dark suit, his tie slightly loosened, as if he had just come in from a walk. He looked directly into the camera, not at a script. When he began to speak, his voice was not the clipped, patrician tone of official addresses. It was lower, rougher, tinged with an emotion that sounded raw and unscripted. "Good evening," he began. "I had prepared a different speech for tonight. One about trade, about the environment, about the future of our Commonwealth. My advisors wrote it. It was very good. It was also a lie. Not in its facts, but in its omission." He paused, I letting the silence hang heavy. "In recent days, a question has been asked of me by the press and by the public. It is a question that has been asked for over 30 years. It is the question of my marriage. It is the question of my heart. And tonight, I am going to answer it, not as your king, but as a man." Across the nation, a collective intake of breath was audible. This was not happening. Kings did not do this. "In 1970, I met a woman named Camilla Shand," he continued, a faint, genuine smile touching his lips. "She was beautiful. She was funny. She was completely unimpressed by the fact that I was a prince. To her, I was just a young man with large ears and a tendency to talk too much about plants. And I fell in love with her. It was not a crush. It was not a fling. It was, for me, the defining moment of my life." He leaned forward, his hands clasped between his knees. "But I was young, and I was weak. I was sent away on naval duty, and in my absence, she was persuaded, by circumstances, by pressure, by my own silence, that I would not, or could not, offer her the life she deserved. And so she married someone else. It was the first great tragedy of my life, and I have replayed it in my mind 1,000 times. What if I had been braver? What if I had fought for her then?" The camera held his face, and the grief there was palpable. Years passed. I did my duty. I married a beautiful, vibrant, deeply troubled young woman named Diana, and I tried, with every fiber of my being, to make that marriage work. But the heart, as the poets say, wants what it wants, and my heart was, and always had been, somewhere else. I do not excuse my actions during that time. I do not excuse the pain I caused Diana. She was a remarkable person, taken from us far too soon, and the guilt I carry for the unhappiness of those years is a burden I will bear for the rest of my life." His voice cracked slightly, and he paused to gather himself. "But I am here tonight to talk about another burden, the burden carried by the woman I did eventually marry. For over 50 years, Camilla has been vilified. She has been called a home wrecker. She has been blamed for the failure of my first marriage. She has been subjected to a level of scrutiny and hatred that is frankly inhumane, and she has borne it all with a dignity and a silence that I have marveled at. He reached out and turned the photograph on the side table to face the camera. It was a candid shot,